Hey everyone, we're about to jump into this week's episode, but before we do, I wanted to get you ready to ignite your service desk journey with the return of the SDI Conference and Awards. I want you to mark your calendars now for March 27th and 28th of 2025, because this is really the event you won't want to miss. So picture this, 2 days and one evening packed full of learning, growth, and a whole lot of memorable moments as we celebrate the best of the best in the service desk and the support universe. I want you to join us, me and SDI, at the Hilton Metropole Birmingham in the UK for the ultimate fiesta, where industry leaders are going to swap stories, strategies, and possibly even a few trade secrets. But wait, there's even more. Right? Be one of the lucky 100 to snag a massive, I'm talking huge 60% blind bird discount. Plus, that comes with a free VIP upgrade. It's easy. Book now and secure your spot for just £270 or about $340 for 2 days of the conference. And guess what, guys? You've got to eat anyway. It's only another $38 or £30 to attend the awards dinner. But you've got to act quick because this offer ends May 31st. And I don't want you to miss out on this incredible offer. So buy now and elevate your service desk game to new heights. You need to find out more, just visit sdiconference.co.uk for more info. Or always drop something in the comments and I can definitely tell you all about this amazing event. Can't wait to see you there. Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Mastermind for the Masses. We have Colby here. Shan unfortunately had a conflict and couldn't make it, but that's okay because we have Chris Del Pozo here. Actually, another amazing podcast host. Also, if you haven't checked it out, Let Me Ask You This podcast. Definitely should check it out. There's actually one that's my favorite. It's probably like his fifth one, and really it's because I was on it. But shameless plug, you should definitely go check out Chris's podcast. I know you can find it on almost anywhere you listen, and he's also really active on TikTok. So he's got some great videos. And Chris, just want to say thanks for coming on today, man. How's it going?
No, thank you so much for the invite. Doing very good, very good. Can't complain. A lot of movements right now.
Perfect. And we're going to throw it to you in just a second for a question, but we always try to check in with everyone. So Colby, anything exciting this week?
Nothing too crazy. Played my first game last week for hockey. That went well. Ended up in a tie, so 3-3. Went into overtime. Still no score, but it was still a lot of fun. It was very refreshing to be able to play a sport like that again. That I didn't get to really play since I was a kid, so that was a lot of fun. Yeah, looking forward to the next one this week.
It's awesome, man. I'm gonna have to come up there sometime to watch you play.
Yeah, you don't want to watch it. It's pretty bad.
That might make it more fun for
me. Yeah, maybe.
Get some live footage for the pod.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Well, Chris, like I said, man, super happy to have you here. Really excited to just hear what you've brought for us to kind of chit chat about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question I had for you guys was going to be, how do you find the capability of being able to motivate somebody who runs into walls? So, and like for an example, in my last podcast, we had talked about that as somebody who does social media, you reach a certain point and then it almost feels like a chore. And then it makes it more difficult to have the motivation to want to continue doing it. So if someone's running into a wall like that, I guess what would you think would be a good way to approach, try to kind of help push past those barriers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my initial thoughts that come to me, right, are I think that effort put forth is really a combination of drive and determination. So determination is one of those things that's really made up of patience and endurance. So are you willing to wait for something, and are you willing to continue to work for it while you wait? So I think that's the drive side of it. And I don't know if you really have much of an impact there. It's really up to the person if the thing they're pursuing or those hurdles are worth enduring through or waiting for them to pass. But where you can make more of an influence, I feel like, is in that drive area. And for me, drive is made up of interest in doing something and someone's belief that they can, right? Because if you're interested in doing something and you believe that you can accomplish it, obviously you're going to be driven towards it. Whereas if you're missing one of those elements, if you don't believe that you can, but you're interested in, you're probably not going to necessarily pursue after it because you don't think you can accomplish it. And if you believe that you can do something, but you're not interested in it, well, that's great. You're just going to maintain that belief and you're not really going to go after it. So I think if you really want to have an impact on motivating others, you really, I don't think, can force someone to be motivated, but what you can do is use kind of that zone of influence that you have to really provide one of three things, right? Opportunities, obstacles, or reinforcement. And I think it depends on the person. But if you're talking about really trying to make an impact on that drive to re-motivate, I would heavily focus on that interest side of things, and try to get back to the root of why they wanted to pursue that in the beginning, and then provide the reinforcement and encouragement to get them back on the interest. Now, if they're starting to doubt their capabilities, you do want to probably address that belief aspect by providing them probably small win opportunities, right? How can I make a small step in that direction? Because the best indicator of future success is past success. You kind of get that momentum built up and they're going to drive towards it. So if you can reignite that drive and they have the determination for it, they're going to put the effort forth. I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, but that's my doctoral dissertation on the answer to your question there.
No, and it definitely makes sense. It definitely makes sense. It's one of those things. I think Denzel Washington said it: the commitment and dedication. Without commitment, without commitment, you don't start, and without dedication, you don't
Continue.
I might have it backwards. I'm not sure, but yeah,
Sounds about right.
Which is true. Yeah.
Good advice either way.
But as someone myself that I've ran into kind of some of those barriers sometimes, I do agree with you. Sometimes you have to kind of reflect on why you're doing it in the first place and whether or not it's something that you truly want to do. Because then you kind of reestablish the purpose of you doing it in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think like that reflection piece is really critical when you hit something like that, because it's a perfect time to actually consider whether or not you really do want to continue doing this and driving yourself towards it. Because to me, I don't think you actually, at least in my personal opinion, there's a lot of stuff that I'm not interested in the task itself, right? So in your instance, right, doing marketing or some sort of social media posting at every set interval that you determine, right? Maybe you're not super interested in that, but what you are interested in is the results that it will yield and the benefit that you'll get from it, right? So it's like, to me, it's like you almost have to focus on that instead and like use that as your driving force, to Josh's point. Because I don't think you necessarily need to be super interested in everything that you do, but you do have to have something that does motivate you to get it done regardless. And if the motivation isn't there and the interest isn't there, then I don't understand why you're doing it in the first place. Or you should maybe start to, I guess, lower your expectations in terms of what you need to put forward every time you do that thing, right? Like I know for me, I think working out is a great example, right? So getting back into working out, was a harder thing for me to do until I just started to be like, all right, I'm going to go through 3 days a week. I don't have to go every day, right? I don't have to go 5 days a week, and I only have to be there in the gym for 30 minutes. As long as I don't care what I do in the gym, but as long as I'm there for 30 minutes, 3 days a week, I can leave satisfied. Like I'll be, happy, I'll give myself a reward, whatever it is. Right. And I'll at least start there. Right. You start small and you can kind of like incrementally, you get more comfortable with that thing. You get better at doing that thing. And then you can expand from there. But I think a lot of the times too, what people do is they'll set some sort of crazy goal, which is like very helpful for certain people, but I think also very detrimental to a lot of others, where it's too daunting. It's too much, right? You need to, you know, I guess you need to expand your competence level almost at that thing before you can start to set these really lofty expectations for yourself. Because I feel like for what happens for a lot of people is they realize how much they're not up to the task based off what they initially thought, and then they give up rather than be like, okay, maybe I just need to start smaller and inch my way there, right? You can't eat an elephant in one bite, right? You have to do one little bit at a time, sort of thing. So yeah, it's kind of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, and you hit on something there, Colby, that I definitely believe, right? So you're talking about what is that I guess outcome for the interest, right? So you talked about the same task, but the interest in what you were trying to achieve was different, right? What your motivation and your driving force was, and I think that's a great definition for success is when your interests align with the outcome. So the thing you were interested in pursuing, you actually achieve. Um, and again, your interests may change over time, and things happen that influence that, especially over the course of a lifetime. But I think that's probably most people's measure of success at the end of the day is, are they really satisfied with what they have produced? And, that's why success is different for everyone, because it really does align with your own personal interest. Um,
Yeah, I
so
wanted to ask Chris too, just real quick about, what his perception of like the idea of just kind of grinding through things. And because like I've always had that idea, like personally too, where sometimes I just kind of have to force myself to do something for a longer period of time, and then I eventually start liking doing it. But my motivation really isn't super high to do it. My interest isn't super high to do it. I kind of abstractly know that this is something I need to do, but my internal motivation for it really isn't there. But when I like abstract out, I want to be here at this point in my life. I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. I would love to be there, right? And then you find yourself really dragging and like dreading going to do it. Yes, you can break it down into smaller pieces, but still it may not be super fun. But like for me, I found that if I just like grind it out for 2 to 4 weeks, it does tend to start to get better. And then if it doesn't, like obviously I reevaluate and make sure that this is something I really want to do. But I'm just curious what your perspective on that, Chris, and if you think that's a healthy way of approaching things, or if you think that's not helpful at all.
Well, so before when you touch based on like taking larger goals and breaking them into smaller goals, I mean that's something that we talk about all the time, especially when doing therapy. It's just understanding that when there's too much at one time, it there's a book, Eat That Frog, um, that kind of goes into topics like that, but it's definitely just one step at a time. Now to answer your question, that approach honestly I think is probably the most helpful approach. Realistically, I personally think that if you evaluate what you're doing as something that you really want to do, but you run into scenarios where you are not as motivated to do it, I think this is where that concept of just commitment and consistency comes into play. If you stay consistent, even though you don't like it, that's in a way it's a form of discipline. And if I've noticed anything, when we can discipline ourselves to do something, we tend to excel the most at it. So it's just a matter of finding what would be able to help us get to the mindset of disciplining ourselves in that way. And it's kind of funny, one I saw a video where someone had mentioned the best version of you is not the I can do whatever I want version of you. The best version of you is the disciplined version of you, because you have the capability of choosing not to do something even though you want to do it. And that version of you has the control over your own decisions and your emotions and things of that nature. So if you try to focus on the mindset that you can discipline yourself into doing the things that you don't want to do, then you're always going to exceed in the things that you don't necessarily feel comfortable doing. You probably end up being more comfortable doing those things eventually after doing it for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, we had a great podcast a little ways back, I think, with John Nocter, where we talked about the fact that, you hear this phrase, get out of your comfort zone a lot of the times. But when we were talking with him, what I really came to realize is that, we're expanding our comfort zones because it's kind of like a rubber band, right? The more you use it, the less it springs back. And well, maybe in the use case of a rubber band, that's not helpful. In the use case of expanding your comfort area, I think it is the fact that it doesn't spring back always to the least or to a smaller arena. I think the more you take on, the more things you experiment and try, obviously you get a little more comfortable in those situations. But that does also lead me into kind of what we talked about last week a little bit, which was, you can't say yes to everything, because when you do, you're saying no to something at some point. And that goes to what you were just talking about, Chris, with really making sure that, is this something that is worth your effort and your dedication and sticking with it, or is it something that is no longer aligned with that interest that you're pursuing? So I think when you're talking about kind of trying to ignite motivation in somebody else, it's reminding them of why they started and ensuring that that's still a reason, right? Because I can tell you personally, what I can get hung up on sometimes is ego, right? Am I accomplishing this thing just to say I accomplished the thing? And, because now I feel better about myself because I did some arbitrary thing that really has no value to anything other than boosting my ego, right? And if that's the case, I try to cut that out. I've tried to get a lot better at that over the years. But I know when I was younger, 100%. I mean, that's why I did half the stuff I did when I was younger, was just because I felt some innate need to prove myself as opposed to actually being motivated and trying to accomplish something for a bigger purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, because I 100% agree with you, Josh, and I think something that people get hung up on is this idea that it's going to feel positive, happy, and smooth the entire way through doing something and trying to achieve something. Like, it's just, you should never have that expectation. In my opinion, when you try to set out to do something, there's going to be periods where it just sucks. In my honest opinion, like I don't think there's a way around that unless to me, it's because it's like you could have super simple, straightforward things that you do and you feel that and it's great. Like, no pain whatsoever. But most like things that are really worth accomplishing never feel like that. Like there's always some sort of like trouble you have to go through to like push through. And but I think like for some reason, even myself sometimes, even though I like know this, if I'm thinking about it, I'll go through. I'm like, man, this sucks. Should I really be doing this? And then I'm like think back to myself. It's like, well, like this is just what happens. And like if I really want this, like I just got to push through, right? And I think it's helpful because a lot of people think that, and I mentioned this on a prior episode too. A lot of people think that they're weird or different when they hit that wall, when they hit this part where it's like, ooh, this is like terrible. Like there was a really interesting example. I was listening to some podcast. I can't remember the name, but they were talking about like long distance marathon running, I think. And this person that was like really trying to train for it kept hitting a block where they're like, yeah, I always hit this part in the marathon and it's just like tough. Like I'm like struggling. Like, do I just not have what it takes? Like physically, like, am I just not, built for this? Right. And there's more of an inclination to do it in that sense because you feel like you're physically limited. Right. But then what happened was that they talked to, people in the field and they're like, do you experience this? Like they were like kind of getting other people's feedback. They're like, yeah, I did the same thing. It's like, well, what do you do? Like, how do you prevent it? And they're like, you don't. You just like continue to push through it. Like it's a mental war. It's not a physical war. And when they realized that, they were able to push through because they realized, oh, it's not like I'm physically limited. I just have to like mentally push through it. And I just felt like that was such a great example of that sort of thing because you think that you're special, you're unique, you're a unicorn that just has all these problems, right? And it's like, no, like other people have very similar problems, if not the same sometimes. And they just find a way to just like push through it mentally. And, you're just gonna have to do that sometimes. And that's okay. And you should expect that to happen.
Do you remember what mile mark that was, Colby?
I can't remember. It was insane. Like we're talking like it's like the ultra marathon runners, where it's like an absurd amount of miles. Yeah.
Gotcha. Because I remember when I ran my marathon, mile 2021, it just had to pull through because literally it was tough for sure.
Well, you know,
Chris-
I definitely think, especially like with like working out and instances of like doing physical efforts, a lot of it is mental. You know, surpassing a certain weight when working out or a mile marker like that, like a lot of it is mental. And it's kind of funny because one of the things that you touch base is the aspect of understanding that, and this is literally with everything when it comes to mental illnesses or any type of circumstances in those fields, but it's one of those things that you never make anything go away. Depression doesn't go away. Anxiety doesn't go away. Stress doesn't go away. That's a big one. People think that you can make, you know, I want to live a less stressful life. It's not possible. What happens is you learn how to deal with these things at a different level. So if you have high stress, then you learn how to deal with high stress so it's not as stressful, and then it's not as stressful. But it doesn't just magically go away. You can't take something that just makes these things go away. So having the mindset, honestly, with anything, when it comes to, if you can understand that instead of trying to make something go away, but just learn how to adjust in order to deal with it, or at least accept that it's there, and don't allow it to prevent you from doing what you want to do, then that essentially becomes that overcoming aspect. But it never
Yep.
goes away. Like depressed people will always say that they have depression, but somebody that overcomes it is going to say, yeah, but I learned how to maintain it. Somebody has ADHD, they learn how to maintain it rather than trying to make it disappear, just because it doesn't disappear. These things don't just magically go away. But
Yeah,
that overcoming part's one of the hardest parts.
for sure.
Chris,
Yeah, I mean, like you're always like growing to meet challenges. You can't really shrink the challenge in almost every case. So yeah, I think that's very true.
Chris, I know you have a psychology background as well, and I'm super interested. You know, you were just touching on kind of like awareness, right? And so having an awareness around the challenges you face and figuring out a way to cope and you know address those items to minimize their impact. Do you have any strategies or any suggestions for our listeners to maybe increase that awareness or be able to really figure out ways to, you know, take on some of those challenges? And I know that's a big question, but you know, I love
Yeah, well,
turning it around.
so, well, one of the things you said earlier was, you know, being comfortable with with uncomfortable situations. Well, I would arguably say most of the time the reason why people get uncomfortable is because of fear, for the most part. And the easiest way and the most effective way of dealing with fear is small exposure over time and gradually increasing that amount of exposure, right? So if something is overwhelming to you, your goal is you want to take it and break it down to the smallest step that you can handle, and then slowly, gradually move your way closer and closer to the ultimate goal of that. Uh, One of the things that I have come to accept, though that stinks, is if someone is not prepared to deal with that, then there's not much as an outside person that you can do for them. But if someone is willing to put in the effort that they want to push themselves in a direction that's going to help them grow, then to evaluate, self-reflect is huge, right? So you were mentioning that before about yourself, that you evaluate whether or not, you know, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for self-interest? And sometimes that self-interest could be beneficial to maybe your family. So then it's not so much self-interest anymore, but maybe you need to think of it as self-interest in order to motivate you to do it that way. Sometimes you can kind of trick your body to do the things that you want it to do if you can self-reflect enough to be able to notice when you do certain things, right? So for an example, for me, I have always loved going and exercising and going to the gym and stuff like that. But I always, especially when I had a family, had a very difficult time trying to figure out how I can incorporate exercising and spending time with my family because they're both incredibly important. So I had to figure out what worked for me that allowed me to stay consistent so that I can continue maintaining going exercising as like a day-to-day routine. And it took a lot of maneuvering. It took me basically creating a gym in my own house. But because I had the commitment that I wanted to do it and have both, I was able to, instead of looking at it in a way that it didn't, like I couldn't do it, I was like, all right, well, this is my options. What can I do with what I have in order to make it work for what I'm looking for? And at the end of the day, a lot of it, it's perspective. You not everybody thinks that way, but if you can try to approach the understanding that if you start looking at everything in a way that you have control over it, you can start manipulating more to your favor to actually get you where you want it to be. And I know it kind of bounced a little bit of everywhere, but it's because everything is so different per person, right? You don't have one way that's going to help all people, but if most people at least take the time to self-reflect on what they are doing, because you can only control what you do, right? You can't control what anybody else does. You can't control what anybody else says. You can control what you say and what you do. So if you take control of what you say and what you do and you reflect, you at least are giving yourself an opportunity to be able to see how you can make adjustments within your own life to be able to start moving maybe towards the direction that you're trying to inevitably go to.
Yeah. It's funny because it almost sounds like you prevented yourself from being your own brick wall, right? You kind of had this obstacle come up, and rather than get hung up on what you were going to do, you found the opportunity around it. Because you started off the conversation asking about how do you motivate people when they hit that brick wall, but what if you yourself are the brick wall, right? How do you get around that? That's an interesting concept.
Yeah,
Where
well,
do you think?
I
Go
run
ahead.
into it with other categories, psychology, because I cannot stand school and I cannot stand doing homework. But I put myself to do these things because at the end of the day, my goal is to get my degree and do the things that I want to do. And I understand that part, but the getting there is not so easy, and that self-motivation can, even for somebody who may seem like they got it figured out, it's very difficult. I will never deny it, just because it's going to always happen. I To think that this will be the last time I would run into a wall with something that I enjoy, not I don't, because I know that at the end of the day, I'm always going to run into things that I may not be prepared for. But if I can adjust and react and not react emotionally, then I have learned that I'm giving myself the best opportunity to try to address it.
Yeah.
Well,
I think you're. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Well, I was actually going to ask you this question, Colby. But I was thinking, a couple of things that I totally agree with, right? You can only control what you do. But then we started off the pod asking about how do you motivate somebody else? And that's why I kind of went down the rabbit hole of, interest and reminding them of their interest, because you can influence, you have the ability to influence. So I was curious, and I was going to specifically ask you, Colby, but I was curious about where you see the power of the people you surround yourselves with in this motivation concept, right? Because I have found if you're around other high performers, they kind of push you to want to do a little bit more. But whereas maybe if you don't have a good support system, you have to really rely on that internal drive. So I want to throw that question to you, but if you had something else to touch on before that, go for
No,
it.
it's great because I can actually loop it into what I was going to talk about because I think they actually do relate. Because what I was initially going to bring up was like fixed versus growth mindset. I don't know where the coin or the term, like the phraseology of that initially came from, but just basically the idea that like if someone with a fixed mindset is kind of like intuitively what you would think it is, right? It's just like I am this person who does these things, who has these abilities, and these are immutable and will never change. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's completely like, you're never going to change who you are essentially. If you, like you, and you identify it like at a very root level of your personality with that thing, right? Whereas someone like with a growth mindset is obviously the exact opposite, where it's like they think, how am I going to accomplish this thing? Like it's basically like a solution oriented mindset. Like when you come across a problem, what are the solutions? I don't like, this is a problem. I don't need to dwell on it. What do I need to do to move forward? What, like, do I need to go in a different direction? Do I need to, get a new set of tools, etc. And I just like, I kind of like picked that out of what you were saying, Chris, because it really just resonated with me a lot because, I just see it all the time. Yeah, like you'll hear people, they'll lament over the issues that they're having, and there's a healthy amount of venting that I think is like you should do in your life, right? Get something off your chest, like just really, just unfiltered, just vent it out. But I think at a certain point, you do have to be like, all right, now that that's off my chest, what do I actually do to move forward? And I think a lot of people just don't take that next step either because they don't believe that they can, or it could be a number of reasons, right? But to your point, Josh, about the people you surround yourself with, I've tended to notice that the people who are very fixed in their mindset about their capabilities and what they can do are surrounded by a bunch of people who also believe that same thing. They have very limited beliefs about themselves. They'll always phrase things in a way it's like, I'm not physically capable of doing that. I'm not smart enough to do this. Like, and I think obviously like I'm guilty of it as well. Like growing up, like I didn't think that I could, learn programming. I didn't think that I could, go into and do like a really complicated science degree right in college, right? And it was just because like, I heard things, people tell stuff to me about who I was and what I could do, right? And you start to believe what other people tell you. But if you're around people who are like, no, screw that, man. Like you can do that. It's going to be hard as hell, but like you can do that. You just got to put your mind to it, study, and figure out a way to get it done, right? And the more you're around people who are consistently saying that, you start to believe it. It's kind of like that whole self-affirmation stuff that you kind of hear in psychology as well. It's very, very true. The more you hear stuff, it kind of gets like beaten into you almost. And yeah, you kind of want the healthy beatings, not the bad ones, I guess.
Well, it's funny around that is the aspect, you really are the product of your environment, right? So if you see other people who are performing at a high level, what you're doing is you're subconsciously noticing the patterns that they are doing in order to continue maintaining that high level. So you start then adapting these patterns and these behaviors because you notice that it works. A lot of times, and I guess the reason why I emphasize so much that you can control only what you do is because sometimes, even though someone may say that they want to be motivated or want to do something, they're not mentally ready to do it yet because they're not addressing something that they had that has happened in their life that is preventing them from getting there. And that's where it makes it really hard because realistically, I would say the one of the ways that you can know the difference between somebody who's ready versus not ready is somebody who's seeking help. It's a lot of people don't have the answers, but the people who are seeking the answers are the ones that are going to find the answers. Whereas the people who don't seek for an answer are just going to dwell on what they believe to just exist. So you can motivate somebody as much as you can, but you can't force them to really receive the message until they're ready. And a lot of times you'll see these types of behaviors, especially based on how they grew up. If you have people that with families that grew up where when problems come up, they just shut down, that's what they know. That's their product. They are the product of that environment. So when they grew up in that kind of environment, that's what they see. That's what they think is normal. And then when you think that's normal, you're going to continue behaving that way because you don't know different until you observe someone doing it differently. And a lot of times people don't, I would arguably say people don't change unless they are put in a position that they need to change or that they want to change because they see that person doing something that they want to be able to do. So then they start copying that person's behaviors. So it's interesting because I feel like I'm like Josh was saying, I'm going back and forth in the aspect of what you can and can't do with people, but it's knowing that if you are in a position where you see somebody could basically maybe can use some help, I would arguably say that the best help that you can offer anybody is going to always be to be there when they ask for you for help, rather
Yeah.
than trying to help them if you see them that they need help, because sometimes that backfires. I would
Mhm.
arguably say that probably backfires more often than helpful.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
100% agree with that.
Yeah. If I circle that back, right? If they're not interested in receiving help, they're not going to be driven to take it. And there's
Very
absolutely
true.
no reason. I think being there as that resource is incredibly valuable. And touching on that, right? And kind of hitting back on something you said earlier about mindset as well. That person might be trying to help you by putting an obstacle in your path. So you have to sometimes consider what the obstacle actually is, and that's where that perspective and reflection and kind of looking at it is. Because I can tell you from a leadership perspective, there's definitely sometimes, and even as a father, right, I've put some obstacles in place to help develop either the kids skills or to protect them from making a choice that I think is going to be detrimental for them, right? So it's really a balance when you're that person on in that external locus of control trying to influence someone on their internal locus. It's quite complex, right? And deciding whether or not to provide an obstacle in their path, it could serve as an opportunity, or it could be intended to be an obstacle. So it depends on the person, and you really have to kind of understand what that person wants to provide the right type of influence in order, and maybe not even what they want, but what they need to provide the right type of influence in order to reignite that motivation that they have or had towards an objective, right? So just
Yeah.
depends.
I actually have
And that's what
something.
the challenge is with all of these. Go ahead, man. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, I was actually, as you were saying that, I came up with another, or not came up with, but I just thought of another really helpful analogy to kind of illustrate your point. Because I think, to me, what it kind of sounds like is you have to, as the person helping the person who needs help, is understanding like what character you are in their story, essentially. So, right, like if you watch a movie, you read a book or something like that, there's all these other characters around the main character, so to speak, in this setting. Right, people shouldn't think of themselves as the main character necessarily, but just for the sake of the analogy, right? And you have supportive father figures, the supportive mother figures, you have the friends, you have the sort of like ruler maybe in the story that like has like these like set rules in place, and those could be the obstacles provided, right? So there's all these different people who play different roles in that person's life, and I do think it's very helpful to think about yourself like that in other people's lives, in the sense that like you're not going to be their dad, right? Like I'm not Josh's dad, I'm not Chris's dad, obviously, right? But I could easily be one of their friends that is there to, maybe it's not my time to criticize them or do something like that, but maybe it's my time to support them, to encourage them, to give them words of affirmation, those sorts of things, right? And because like I think there's a million things you can always say to someone, right? But it has to be contextualized within the framework of what am I in their life right now, and what do they need from me, right? You have to come at it from a very selfless perspective. It's not about what I wish I could tell them. It's about what I know they need me to give them in this moment. And obviously that's a really hard skill to develop, because it requires a level of emotional intelligence that is very hard to get, and it just takes time, I think, a lot of the time. But yeah, I just like when you were talking about the justice, instantly what came to my mind, because I just think about so many examples in my life where it's like, man, I feel like I have what they need to fix their problem, but they don't need me to fix their problem right now. Like they just need me to be there to support them and be there for them. So
And then I would even arguably say that whether or not fixing the problem for them would be the best solution in the first place. And that's one of the things that I personally have coming into the conclusion where the only circumstance that I would say I think might be a little bit different that Josh touched base on would be parenting, because as a parent, you are responsible to prepare your children to the best of your abilities when they go out into the world, right? So I definitely think that comes into play. But it's so hard sometimes when you see somebody that's struggling, but in order for them to maybe really understand what it is to do it right the first time, or to do it right, maybe they need that struggle, because there's a good chance that when you learned how to do it correctly, you had to struggle in order to figure it out, and you developed the skill that allowed you to be able to figure it out. Where if someone constantly gets handouts because they're struggling, they're going to more than likely have difficult time throughout their lives because they lack the skill of critical thinking, troubleshooting, figuring out what they needed to do in order to get to that solution. And
Yep.
it's hard because as an empathetic person, you want to be helpful. You don't want to see somebody suffer,
Yep.
but sometimes
Absolutely.
that's kind of needed.
Well, and I think to echo both your points, right? That influence or that zone of influence definitely is impacted based on the level and degree of the relationship you have, also,
Oh,
right? Like when I first met Colby, I wouldn't say everything that I would say to him today, right? Because we've built, a relationship over time, and we've gotten closer. We understand each other better, and now the things I can tell him, even possibly even more bluntly, right? It's different because he knows where I'm coming from. He understands me. We've built a relationship. So that type of connection allows him and I to have more impact on our influence. Whereas if I meet some guy on the street and he gives me the same advice that Colby might give me, Colby's is going to carry a lot more weight because he has a much more influential portion in my life. So going back to what Colby said, it really is about the level of relationship that you have with someone and that person's individual needs. And, to echo you again, Chris, is, how much understanding that person and understanding what they actually need is critical to understand how much help you should provide. Because there definitely are times where helping someone can be detrimental to their long term success. It's that whole give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime, right? And I think that's a very important approach when you're looking at how you interact and help others kind of regain their motivation where you can.
Yep.
yeah, absolutely.
So, Chris, how do we do on covering the topic, man? Do you feel like we dove into it well before we dive into our final thoughts?
Very, very much so. I love just being able to bounce ideas off of just different people and different perspectives, and it's like I cannot emphasize the importance of understanding that just hearing other people's way of thinking will help make so many decisions in life. And for people who maybe can't take advice well or don't know how to start with advice, asking for advice, even if you don't take it, is so beneficial. Like you don't have to take the advice, but just hear out the person. So, but no, I absolutely think that we definitely cleared it very well. So I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, no, and
Absolutely.
I agree with you 1,000% that you really need to hear the feedback, whether you're asking for it or not. And you may not need to apply it, but if you aren't at least open to it, then you're never going to get anything from it, right? Even if you listen to it and you think it's completely garbage, right? At least now you've gotten something out of it because you've solidified in your original opinion and you have more justification for it. So feedback is a gift, no matter where it's coming from. But all right, well, let's wrap things up with final thoughts here. Colby, you want to kick us off with your final thoughts around this topic?
Absolutely. Honestly, I think my final thoughts would be around just we'll just say one word, is just hypocrisy. I think a lot of people, when they listen to others and then they hear some really good advice and then they see later down the line, they're like, wait, like you didn't just do what you said that you should do. Like, are you just like, full of crap, or like, what is the deal? And I get the inclination for people to feel that way, like, oh, it's just a load of bullcrap, right? But I've actually never, I kind of have that inkling, but at the same time, I've always thought it's just like, oh, I mean, they probably just made a mistake, right? Like every other person in this world making mistakes all the time because they're human. People make mistakes, and these ideas that we're talking about, all three of us, I'm sure, I know even for myself, definitely struggle with these same things on a day-to-day basis, right? Struggle with stress levels, struggle with pushing myself, with motivating myself to do stuff, struggle with having too much stuff on my plate to do in a given day, and I feel bad about it, and then I have to reflect, right? It's a constant battle, right? And so it's just, if you're feeling that way, it's easy to listen to this and think, oh, it's just they got to figure it out. It's like, no, we don't have it figured out. We struggle with this all the time, and it's completely natural for you to feel that way. It's not, you don't just learn it and then you're good. Like, you still have to work on it every day. To Chris's point about, you don't reduce anxiety levels. You just figure out ways that are healthy ways to deal with them and overcome them, essentially. And I think too, the last thing I wanted to throw out was just, if you're struggling with these concepts that we're talking about, it could also just be that you have some major life stressors, happening at the moment, right? Like things that are just really messed up, and you kind of have to deal with those things first before you can kind of get the rest of your house in order, so to speak. Because I think that's something people don't consider a lot of times. Sometimes you're just going through a lot of stuff, and that's really hard, and you need to get through that, and then you can sort of tighten up the niceties outside of that afterwards. But yeah, that's it.
No, great points. Chris, you got some final thoughts for us, sir?
Yeah. So honestly, this whole thing, it was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. You guys absolutely touch base on a lot of big topics. Especially the hypocrisy. That is huge. I will say, like you said, we don't have it all figured out. I myself, I'm learning every single day. I try to take into consideration that no matter what you've experienced in life, there's going to be always somebody who has more experience and more knowledge than you. And nothing hurts you from hearing somebody else's perspective, story, however you want to take it. But just hearing out somebody else, it never hurts. So I really love just the emphasis on really pushing for people to be willing to hear out advice, because I think there are some beneficial people, or some people in this world that really have good things to offer if there's people willing to listen.
No, it's great points, and I completely agree. It's the power of people, right? The people that, I mean, that's the power of this mastermind, this podcast, us getting together and talking through these challenges, issues, getting the different perspectives, and great opportunities to do that. We want to hear the perspectives of all of our listeners, so please do comment and share. And yes, you want to receive feedback, but also be willing to give it if you're asked for it. And so if people are looking for resources like this, please share that with them too. We do this for all of you, and we want to hear what you want to hear about, because we'll get that topic covered. We'll answer that workplace dilemma question. We'll tackle anything that you really want to throw our way. We're up for the challenge. We want to extend our comfort zone, and we invite you to help us do that. So with that, I want to thank Chris again for being here, taking time out of his day to really give us a fantastic podcast. And we want to thank all of our listeners, and look forward to seeing you next time here on Mastermind for the Masses.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely. And Chris, I should have asked, man, anything to shout out, man, with your podcast or anything like that? Where can people connect with you, man?
Oh yeah. So like you said before, it's the Let Me Ask You This podcast. I'm on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and Facebook, Instagram. And then I also have TikTok that we do some shorts on. And then I have a Coach Chris Del Pozo TikTok account that I offer some relationship and couples advice. So if you ever want to check that out.
Awesome. I follow him on there, so you guys should too, because he's got some great advice out there. So thanks again, Chris. And we will see everyone next time on Mastermind for the Masses. So long.
Awesome.